Welcome back to our English Learning Podcast. We're so happy you're here with us today, and trust me, this episode could change the way you learn English forever. Whether this is your first time listening or you've been with us for a while, we're thrilled to have you. And if you've been feeling stuck with your English learning, you're not alone. Today, we're going to tackle one of the biggest problems that holds back so many learners: wasting time. Let me ask you, how many times have you spent hours memorizing vocabulary lists, drilling grammar rules, or binge-watching YouTube videos, only to feel like you're not improving? It's frustrating, right? You put in the effort, but you're not seeing the results. Well, today, we're going to fix that. We're going to show you how to stop wasting your time and start making real progress toward fluency.
That's right. And welcome to everyone listening. We're so glad you're here. If you've ever thought, I've been learning English for years, why am I still not fluent? You're not alone. The truth is, most learners aren't learning wrong. They're just focusing on the wrong things. And once you shift your strategy, you'll be amazed at how quickly your speaking, listening, and confidence improve.
So stick with us, because by the end of this episode, you'll know exactly how to stop wasting time and start learning in a way that actually works. We're giving you clear, practical strategies that you can apply today. And trust me, once you start using these techniques, you'll see progress faster than you think.
Chapter 1. Why most learners waste time. Let's get real for a second. Why do so many learners feel stuck, even after months or years of studying English? You're putting in the hours, you're following the advice, but you still can't hold a smooth conversation. Why? Because most learners are wasting time without even realizing it. And the biggest culprit? Passive learning. Let me explain. Have you ever watched an entire episode of a TV show in English, maybe even 3 or 4 episodes? But when you try to talk about it afterward, your mind goes blank. You understood the story, you followed the dialogue, but you can't put together a single sentence to describe what happened. That's because you are consuming English, not producing it. And that's what passive learning is. Passive learning is when you're taking in information without using it. Watching TV shows, listening to podcasts, reading articles, that's all passive. And while it helps you understand more, it doesn't help you speak more fluently. Understanding and speaking are 2 different skills, and you need to engage with the language to actually improve your speaking.
Exactly. I had a student named Daniel, super dedicated guy. He told me he watched Friends every day for months, 3 episodes a day without fail. He understood most of the jokes and even picked up some slang. But when I asked him to describe an episode, he froze. He said, "I don't know how to explain it." That's because he was absorbing the language, but he wasn't activating it. And that's the mistake so many learners make. They think that just by listening and reading, fluency will magically happen. But it doesn't work that way. Think about it like this. If you watch someone play the piano every day, will you be able to sit down and play yourself? No, because you didn't practice. Language works the same way. Watching shows and listening to podcasts gives you input. But if you don't practice output, actually speaking, you won't build fluency.
That's why active learning matters. Active learning is when you take the language you've absorbed and start using it. It's not enough to understand English, you have to produce it. You have to speak, write, and think in English. That's how fluency is built. Let me give you an example. If you hear a new phrase in a podcast like, "That's a tricky situation," you might understand what it means. But if you never use it in a sentence, your brain won't store it properly. But if you turn around and say to yourself, "Oh, my work situation is tricky right now," you're reinforcing it. That's active learning.
Exactly. And this applies to vocabulary too. So many learners waste hours memorizing vocabulary lists. You know what I'm talking about. Lists like complicated opportunity, recommend occasionally. But if you memorize the word complicated without using it, you'll forget it within days. That's why flashcards and vocabulary apps often don't work. But if you create a personal connection to the word, it sticks. If you say, the instructions were too complicated to follow, or my relationship with my boss is complicated, now the word becomes part of your active memory. You've attached it to something meaningful in your life.
And that's the key. You have to create context for the language you're learning. Don't just memorize words, use them. Don't just listen to English, speak it. If you learn a new phrase from a podcast, try using it in a conversation that same day. If you read a new word in an article, write a sentence with it. That's how your brain stores information, through use, not memorization.
And here's something else that wastes a lot of time: focusing too much on input instead of output. Input is things like listening and reading, and it's important, but it's not enough. You need balance. A lot of learners spend 90% of their time listening to English and only 10% actually speaking it. That's why they understand more than they can say. If you're spending all your time consuming content but not using it, you're not building fluency.
Exactly. If you want to fix that imbalance, you need to switch from passive to active learning. Here's a simple exercise. The next time you watch a TV show or listen to a podcast, pause it after 5 minutes and try to summarize what you just heard, out loud. Even if you don't get it perfect, that's not the point. The point is to get your brain used to forming sentences in English.
Yes. And here's another exercise: shadowing. Shadowing is when you listen to a native speaker and repeat exactly what they say, at the same speed, with the same rhythm. This forces your brain and mouth to work together in English. It's one of the fastest ways to improve your speaking fluency. Try doing this for just 5 minutes a day, and you'll notice a huge difference.
And let's talk about confidence, because a lot of learners avoid speaking because they're afraid of making mistakes. That's why passive learning feels safer. When you're just listening or watching, you don't have to worry about getting it wrong. But when you're speaking, that's where the real growth happens. You have to be willing to mess up. That's how you learn.
That's so true. One of my students, Anna from Brazil, told me she avoided speaking for years because she was terrified of making mistakes. But when she finally joined a language exchange and forced herself to speak, even though it was uncomfortable at first, her fluency skyrocketed in just a few months. She told me, "I realized that people didn't care if I made mistakes. They just wanted to communicate." And that's the mindset shift. It's not about speaking perfectly. It's about being understood.
Yes. Perfection is not the goal. Communication is. Most native speakers don't speak perfectly. They mix up grammar, they forget words. But they keep the conversation going. That's what you need to practice. Keeping the flow even when you make mistakes.
So here's the takeaway. Stop focusing on perfect grammar. Stop memorizing endless lists of vocabulary. Stop waiting until you feel ready to speak. Start practicing today. Switch from passive learning to active learning. If you hear a new phrase, use it. If you learn a new word, put it in a sentence. If you're watching a TV show, repeat the dialogue. If you're listening to a podcast, summarize what you heard. That's how you build fluency.
And here's a quick challenge. After you've finished listening to this episode, take one phrase or word you've learned today and use it in a conversation, even if you have to talk to yourself. Just try it, and you'll see how much faster you remember it.
That's the key. Active learning creates results. Passive learning creates frustration. And once you make that shift, you'll be amazed at how quickly your English improves.
And the next step is learning how to stop overthinking and start speaking with confidence, even when you don't know exactly what to say. That's what we're going to cover next, so don't go anywhere. Chapter 2. Stop overthinking and start speaking. One of the biggest reasons people stay stuck in their English learning journey is because they're waiting to feel ready to speak. But let me give you a reality check. You're never going to feel ready. That feeling of total confidence where you know every word and never make mistakes? That's not how fluency works. Fluent speakers aren't fluent because they know every single word or every grammar rule. They're fluent because they've trained themselves to speak even when they're unsure. I see it all the time. Learners saying, I'm not ready to have a conversation yet. I need to study more first. But that's a trap. If you wait until you feel ready, you'll never start. It's like trying to learn how to swim by reading about swimming. You can understand the technique perfectly, but until you actually jump into the water, you won't learn how to float. It's the same with English. You have to start speaking before you feel completely ready.
That's so true. I had a student named Marcus from Germany who knew a ton of vocabulary and had great listening skills, but he avoided conversations because he was worried about making mistakes. He said, "What if I can't find the right word? What if I embarrass myself?" But here's the thing. Fluent speakers make mistakes all the time. Native speakers forget words, mix up tenses, and mispronounce things, but they keep going. That's the key. It's not about perfection. It's about confidence and flow. I told Marcus, "Look, you're overthinking it. Stop worrying about saying the perfect sentence. Just focus on getting your message across." So we started practicing simple conversations. I asked him to describe his day in English every morning for 2 minutes. He stumbled a lot at first. But after a week, he said it started feeling easier. Why? Because he stopped thinking and started speaking.
That's the mindset shift you need to make. Stop treating English like a test and start treating it like a conversation. You don't need to say the perfect sentence. You just need to communicate your idea. If you say, I go store yesterday, people will understand you mean, I went to the store yesterday. They're not going to judge you. They'll just keep talking. The goal isn't to be perfect. It's to be understood. And you don't need to start with deep, complicated conversations. Start small. Talk to yourself in English while you're doing simple tasks. For example, when you're making coffee, say out loud, I'm making coffee, it smells really good. I think I need to buy more sugar. That's already active learning. You're forming sentences and practicing thinking in English. And guess what? No one's listening, so there's no pressure.
Exactly. And here's the thing. You already know more than you think. Most learners are sitting on a mountain of passive knowledge. They've learned words, phrases, and grammar, but they're not activating it. Speaking helps you unlock that knowledge. And you don't have to wait for the perfect moment. You can start right now. Let's do a quick exercise. Right now, wherever you are, I want you to look around and describe what's around you in English. Just say 3 sentences. For example, I'm sitting in my kitchen. There's a cup of coffee on the table. It's raining outside. Go ahead. Pause this podcast and try it. Don't worry about grammar. Just speak.
See? That's active learning. You don't need to form a perfect sentence. You just need to start forming thoughts in English. The more you do it, the more natural it becomes. Speaking activates the language centers in your brain, and that's when real progress happens.
And don't stop there. Once you're comfortable talking to yourself, start taking it into real conversations. When you're at a cafe, try ordering in English, even if you're not in an English-speaking country. For example, can I get a coffee, please? Do you have oat milk? Thank you. Have a nice day. That's how you train your brain to function in English. The more you do it, the more automatic it becomes.
And here's a trick that works really well. Rehearse common conversations. If you know you're going to a restaurant, practice phrases like, can I see the menu, please? I'll have the chicken sandwich. Could I get the bill, please? When you practice these phrases beforehand, they'll come out naturally in the real situation. And that gives you confidence.
Yes. And another great strategy is to create fallback phrases. These are simple phrases you can use when you get stuck or can't find the right word. For example, how do you say this in English? Sorry, can you repeat that? Let me think for a second. I'm not sure how to explain it, but these phrases give you time to think and keep the conversation going, even when you don't know exactly what to say. Fluent speakers use these all the time. It's not about knowing every word. It's about knowing how to keep the flow.
Exactly. And you know what else helps? Using filler phrases to buy yourself time. Native speakers do this naturally, that's why conversations feel smooth. Try using phrases like, well, you know, actually, let me see. Instead of freezing up, use a filler to give yourself a second to think. For example, if someone asks, "What do you do for work?" Instead of panicking, you could say, "Well, I work in marketing, actually." That little pause gives your brain time to catch up, and it makes you sound more natural.
And here's the last piece of advice. Stop worrying about what people think. Most people are focused on their own thoughts. They're not analyzing your English. If you make a mistake, they won't care. The goal is to communicate, not to sound perfect.
That's so true. I had a student from Japan named Yuki. She told me she avoided speaking because she was afraid people would judge her. But when she finally pushed herself to start conversations, she realized people were patient and encouraging. She said, "I made mistakes, but people still understood me and no one laughed." That's when her confidence skyrocketed, because she stopped trying to be perfect and started focusing on connection.
Chapter 3. Stop wasting time on grammar. Let me ask you something. How many of you have avoided speaking English because you were afraid of making a grammar mistake? You know the feeling. You're about to say something, but then you stop yourself because you're not sure if it's "I have gone" or "I had gone." So you say nothing. But here's the truth. Fluent speakers don't speak perfectly. Native speakers make grammar mistakes all the time. If you say, "He don't like pizza," instead of "He doesn't like pizza," will someone understand you? Of course. They might notice the mistake, but it won't stop the conversation. But if you freeze up and say nothing because you're worried about grammar, now there's no conversation at all. That's why so many learners feel stuck. They're waiting until their grammar is perfect before they start speaking. But that's completely backwards.
Exactly. Grammar perfection is overrated. Let me tell you about a student I worked with, Maria, from Italy. Her grammar was almost perfect, but she told me that conversations still felt stressful. I asked her why, and she said, "I'm afraid of saying the wrong tense." So I challenged her. I said, "Tell me about your last vacation. Don't worry about the tense, just tell me the story." And guess what? She hesitated at first, but once she stopped worrying about grammar, she relaxed, and the story came out naturally. And you know what's funny? She actually made fewer mistakes because she wasn't overthinking it. That's the secret. When you relax and focus on communication instead of grammar, your brain actually works better. The pressure disappears, and that's when your natural fluency starts to come through.
That's such an important point. Most learners believe that they need to master grammar before they can speak confidently. But that's not how language learning works. Think about how you learned your native language. Did you study grammar rules before you started talking as a child? Of course not. You listened, copied what you heard, and figured out the rules naturally through practice. That's how you learn to speak your first language. And it's how you'll learn English too.
Exactly. And let's be honest, English grammar is complicated. Even native speakers get confused sometimes. How many times have you heard someone say, "Me and my friend went to the store"? That's technically incorrect. It should be "my friend and I," but no one cares. Why? Because the message is clear. That's what matters. Communication, not perfection.
Let's test this right now. I'm going to give you 2 sentences. Tell me which one sounds more natural. 1. I am sorry, but I am unable to meet you tomorrow because I have an appointment. 2. Sorry, I can't meet you tomorrow. I've got an appointment. The second one, right? Why? Because it's simple and natural. The first one is grammatically correct, but it sounds stiff. That's why focusing too much on grammar actually makes you sound less fluent.
And let's be real, most conversations happen informally. If you're at a party or a coffee shop, no one expects you to speak like an English professor. If you say, "I go store yesterday," everyone will know you meant "I went to the store yesterday." The conversation will keep flowing, but if you stop and correct yourself, "Oh, sorry, I meant I went to the store yesterday," you break the flow. That's why fluent speakers sound natural. They don't interrupt themselves to fix small grammar mistakes.
That's such a key point. I remember talking to a student named Ahmed from Egypt. He was super focused on getting his tenses right. Every time he made a small mistake, He'd stop and say, "Oh, wait, I mean," and you could see how uncomfortable it made him. But I told him, "Forget the corrections. Just keep talking." After a couple of weeks, his confidence improved massively, and his grammar improved naturally because he stopped putting pressure on himself.
Exactly. Your brain learns faster when you're not under pressure. That's why immersion works so well. When you live in an English-speaking environment, you don't have time to stop and correct yourself. You have to focus on communicating, and the grammar improves naturally through context.
And here's the reality. Grammar mistakes don't stop the conversation, but hesitation does. If you make a grammar mistake and keep going, the other person probably won't even notice. But if you stop speaking because you're unsure about grammar, that's when the conversation breaks down.
Let me give you a real-life example. Imagine you're traveling and you need directions. If you say, "Where is, the train station is where?" It's not perfect. But guess what? The person you're talking to will still understand you. But if you stand there silently thinking, do I say is or was? Should I say where first? You'll get nowhere. Speaking badly is better than not speaking at all.
Exactly. And here's another common mistake. Spending too much time learning complicated grammar rules that you'll never use. For example, the future perfect continuous tense. By next year, I will have been working here for 5 years. Sure, it's correct. But how often do native speakers say that in real conversations? Almost never. You're better off learning practical, everyday phrases. Things like, "I've been working here for a while," or "I started this job 5 years ago." That's real conversational English.
Exactly. Here's a quick mindset shift that will save you so much time. Stop aiming for perfection and start aiming for clarity. Instead of thinking, did I use the right tense? Ask yourself, did the person understand me? If the answer is yes, you're already winning.
And here's a tip. If you're in a conversation and you're not sure about the grammar, just simplify it. For example, if you're not sure whether to say, "I have been working" or "I was working," just say, "I work there." Simple and clear always works better than complex and confusing.
And let me add one more thing. Mistakes actually make you sound more human. If you speak like a textbook, you'll sound robotic. If you say, "I go store yesterday," people might smile, but they'll keep talking because it sounds real and human. That's why most fluent speakers don't care about small grammar mistakes. They care about connection.
Exactly. So here's the challenge. Stop correcting yourself. The next time you're speaking and you make a small grammar mistake, don't stop. Just keep going. If someone understands you, the conversation is already a success.
And if someone corrects you, just smile and keep talking. Don't apologize. Don't say, "Oh, I'm so bad at English." Just keep going, because fluent speakers don't stop to fix small mistakes. They keep the flow, and that's what makes them sound confident. Chapter 4. How to create a time-efficient learning plan. Now that you know what not to do, let's talk about what actually works. Most learners think they need to spend hours every day studying English to make real progress. But that's not true. You don't need to dedicate your whole day to learning. You just need a focused plan that covers all the key language skills: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. If you study consistently and strategically, you can improve faster with less time. I've worked with so many learners who said, "I don't have time to study English." But the problem wasn't time, it was a lack of structure. They would sit down and think, "Okay, maybe I'll watch a YouTube video or read an article." But there was no clear plan. And without a plan, it's easy to waste time and lose motivation. That's why you need a simple, time-efficient daily routine that targets all the core skills. Let me give you an example of a 35-minute daily plan that works for almost any schedule. And trust me, if you follow this for even 2 weeks, you'll start noticing real progress. Morning. 10 minutes of listening. Listen to a podcast, the news, or an audiobook in English. But don't just listen passively. Engage with it. If you hear a new phrase, repeat it out loud. Try to mimic the speaker's tone and rhythm. And here's a tip. Don't use subtitles unless you really need them. Challenge yourself to understand as much as you can from context. Afternoon. 10 minutes of speaking practice. This is where most learners struggle, but it's also where the fastest progress happens. You don't need a language partner to practice speaking. You can talk to yourself. Describe your day. Talk about what you're doing, or even role-play a conversation in your head. If you have a language partner or a conversation group, great, but even solo practice works. Just get comfortable forming sentences out loud. Evening. 10 minutes of reading. Read an article, a short story, or even social media posts in English. But here's the key. Don't just read for meaning. Pay attention to how sentences are structured. Notice the vocabulary and how native speakers phrase things. If you find an interesting phrase, write it down and try using it in your own sentences later. Bonus. 5 minutes of writing. This part is optional but highly effective. Keep a small journal where you write 1 or 2 sentences in English every day. It could be about your day, your plans, or even how you're feeling. Writing helps you organize your thoughts and reinforce the vocabulary you're learning. And the best part? You'll see your progress over time as you look back at your earlier entries.
That's such a simple but powerful plan. Notice how it covers all the core skills: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. But it doesn't feel overwhelming. You don't need to sit down for 2 hours with a textbook. You just need 35 minutes of focused, intentional practice every day. And here's why this works. When you practice consistently in short bursts, you activate your brain's spaced repetition system. Your brain processes language more effectively when you study in short, regular sessions instead of long, exhausting study sessions. That's why cramming for 4 hours on a Sunday doesn't work, but practicing for 30 minutes a day does.
Exactly. And let's talk about why consistency is more important than intensity. Imagine 2 learners. Learner A studies for 2 hours every Sunday. Learner B studies for 10 minutes every day. After a month, Learner A has studied for 8 hours. Learner B has studied for 5 hours. But guess what? Learner B will make faster progress. Why? Because they're engaging with English every day. They're giving their brain time to process and retain the information. The brain remembers better when you learn in smaller, consistent chunks.
And that's why motivation isn't the key. Habits are. If you make English part of your daily routine, it becomes automatic. Just like brushing your teeth. You don't need to think about it, you just do it. That's the goal with language learning.
Sit. And the best way to make it a habit is to anchor it to something you already do. For example, listen to a podcast while you're cooking or walking. Practice speaking while you're getting ready in the morning. Read an article while you're having your morning coffee. Write a quick journal entry before you go to bed. When you link English to something that's already part of your routine, it becomes automatic, and that's how you build consistency.
And here's a pro tip. Track your progress. When you see progress, you feel motivated to keep going. Use a simple notebook or an app to track what you're doing each day. Write down what you listened to, what you practiced speaking, what you read, any new words or phrases you learned. When you look back and see a list of all the work you've put in, you'll realize how much progress you've made, and that motivates you to keep going.
And don't be afraid to adjust your plan based on what works for you. If you prefer listening at night, switch it up. If you find that 10 minutes of speaking isn't enough, increase it to 15. The key is to make the plan work for your lifestyle. But don't overthink it. Keep it simple and consistent.
And let's talk about study materials. Because another way people waste time is by using the wrong resources. If you're listening to content that's too difficult, you'll feel frustrated and confused. If it's too easy, you'll get bored and stop learning. You need to find that sweet spot, where it's challenging enough to learn, but not so difficult that you can't follow it. Here's how to check if something is the right level. If you understand about 70 to 80% of it without a dictionary, it's the right level. If you're understanding less than 50%, it's too hard. If you're understanding 100%, it's too easy.
Exactly. And mix it up. Listen to different accents, British, American, Australian, so you train your ear to understand different variations of English. Read different types of material, news articles, fiction, and even social media posts, to expose yourself to different styles of writing.
And remember, the goal is not perfection, it's progress. If you follow a structured plan like this, you'll see improvement within weeks. Even if you only have 10 minutes, it's enough to create momentum.
Chapter 5. Mindset Shift. Don't fear mistakes. Let me ask you something. How often do you stop yourself from speaking because you're afraid of making a mistake? How many times have you thought, what if I use the wrong tense? Or, what if I sound stupid? But here's the truth. The fastest way to improve your English is to make mistakes. In fact, if you're not making mistakes, you're probably not learning fast enough. Think about how kids learn to speak. They don't sit down and memorize grammar rules. They say things like, I go to the park instead of I went to the park. Do their parents stop them and say, no, that's incorrect, use the past tense? No, they just keep talking. And over time, their brain figures it out. That's how language learning works, through trial and error. The problem is, adults are afraid of making mistakes because they don't want to feel embarrassed. But that fear is exactly what's holding you back.
That's so true. I had a student named Carlos from Brazil, super smart guy. His vocabulary was great, and his listening was strong, but when it came to speaking, he would freeze. He told me, I'm afraid I'll sound stupid. But here's the reality. Fluent speakers don't sound confident because they never make mistakes. They sound confident because they don't care about their mistakes. Think about native speakers. We make mistakes all the time. We say things like, there's less people here today, when technically it should be fewer people. Or I was like, yeah, no, that's not what I meant. Grammatically messy, but completely natural. The key is that native speakers don't stop to correct themselves. They keep going because communication is more important than accuracy.
Exactly. Communication is the goal, not perfection. Let me give you a real-life example. I had a student from Japan named Aya. She had been studying English for years, but she never wanted to speak because she was afraid of getting it wrong. I told her, from now on, your goal is not to speak perfectly. Your goal is to make at least 5 mistakes per conversation. And guess what? After a week, her speaking improved massively. Why? Because she stopped overthinking and started talking. And when she made mistakes, her brain naturally corrected them over time.
That's such a good strategy. Aim for mistakes instead of avoiding them. It shifts the pressure from, I need to get this right, to I need to get this out. And when you take away that pressure, speaking becomes easier. Plus, mistakes actually help you learn faster because your brain remembers corrections better than perfect sentences.
Yes. There's actual science behind this. When you make a mistake and your brain recognizes it, your brain creates a new neural connection to fix it. That's why mistakes are so powerful. They trigger learning. But if you're not speaking because you're afraid of mistakes, you're missing out on that learning process.
Exactly. Let me tell you about another student, David from Spain. He had a strong foundation in English, but he told me that conversations with native speakers made him anxious. He said, what if I say something wrong? So I gave him this strategy. When you make a mistake, don't stop. Just self-correct in real time. For example, I go to the store yesterday. I went to the store yesterday. She don't like pizza. She doesn't like pizza. Instead of freezing or apologizing, you just smoothly correct yourself and keep going. David said that after a week of trying this, he felt way more relaxed in conversations because he realized that mistakes aren't a big deal.
That's such a powerful shift, because when you stop fearing mistakes, you free yourself to speak more. And the more you speak, the more fluent you become. It's a positive cycle. but it starts with letting go of perfection.
And you know what else helps? Laughing at your mistakes. If you can laugh at yourself when you say something wrong, that's when you know you've reached a new level of confidence. I once had a student say, "I was very exciting to meet you." I smiled and said, "I think you mean excited." We both laughed. And guess what? He never forgot the difference after that.
That's so true. I remember once I was talking to a group of native speakers and I said, I was boring at the party. And they all smiled and said, "You mean you were bored, right?" We all laughed about it. And I never made that mistake again. But it wasn't embarrassing. It was just part of the learning process.
That's exactly it. When you stop treating mistakes like failures, you start learning faster. Think about it. If you're having a conversation and you say, "I go to the store tomorrow," instead of, "I'm going to the store tomorrow," no one's going to stop the conversation and walk away. They'll say, "Oh, cool. What are you getting?" The conversation keeps going. That's why fluent speakers don't sound perfect. They just keep talking.
And that's why apologizing for mistakes is actually a bad habit. If you say something wrong and then stop to apologize, you interrupt the flow of the conversation. Instead of saying, "Oh, sorry, my English is bad. Try this. Wait, I meant to say. Actually, let me say that differently. That's not quite what I meant. What I'm trying to say is," that way, you're correcting yourself without breaking the flow. And you sound more confident while you're doing it.
And here's another tip. If you don't know the right word, don't freeze. Just describe it. For example, "I can't remember the word, but it's the place where you buy medicine. Oh, pharmacy." What's the word for the thing you use to cut paper? Oh, scissors. Fluent speakers do this all the time because the goal is communication, not perfection.
And you know what happens when you stop fearing mistakes? You start enjoying conversations more. You stop analyzing every word and you focus on connection. And when you're relaxed, your brain processes language more effectively, so you actually speak better when you're not trying so hard.
That's the key. Mistakes are not failures. They're proof that you're improving. If you're making mistakes, you're actively learning. And the faster you make those mistakes, the faster you'll reach fluency. Wow, you've made it. If you've stuck with us this far, you've already taken a huge step toward fluency. Now it's time to take action. Stop waiting to feel ready. You're ready now. Stop chasing perfect grammar. Focus on being understood. And stop fearing mistakes. Mistakes are how you learn faster.
That's right. Now it's about consistency. Speak every day, even if it's messy. Follow the daily plan we shared and don't stop if you make a mistake. Just correct yourself and keep going. Progress comes from action, not perfection.
So here's your challenge. After this episode, speak for 60 seconds about anything. No pressure, no perfection, just speak. You've got everything you need. Now go out there and use it. Thank you.